Hey everybody, for my oral presentation, I'm going to be analyzing the role that emergency management has in planning and mitigating climate change and specifically the sea level rise associated with it. So to begin, I'm going to just kind of explain emergency management and its role as a whole in climate change, and then I'm going to take a deeper dive, no pun intended, to the sea level rise more specifically. How I'm going to do this is I'm going to split up into three sections. It's going to be the local level, the state level, and the federal level, sort of mirroring the bottom-up approach that we kind of look to have in these situations. The role of emergency management in climate change is to identify risks and reduce vulnerabilities to those risks for the areas of the population that the emergency management officials are responsible for. They can achieve this by planning and developing a mitigation framework in order to save as much life and property as possible. This can be difficult in some cases as this action is very long-term in design and will not show flashy and immediate results like other action may. Even so, it is the job of emergency management officials to get this done in order to better the lives of those in their jurisdiction. Now we move on to the local level. Since the desired implementation plan for a disaster such as sea level rising is a bottom-up approach, we will start here in our analysis. In Florida, there are three main strategies being implemented at the local level, these being protection, accommodation, and retreat. Protection consists of both hard and soft structurally defensive measures to mitigate the impacts of rising seas, such as shoreline armoring or beach renourishment, in order to decrease vulnerability, yet allowing structures and infrastructure in the area to remain unaltered. These protection strategies must be location-specific in order to most effectively mitigate any effects of sea level rise in the surrounding community. Accommodation strategies don't act as a barrier, but rather alter the design through measures such as structural elevation of buildings or stormwater improvements to allow structures or infrastructure systems to stay in place. These strategies do not prevent flooding of the property from occurring, but they can prevent the structures from flood forces and water damages. Just as the protection strategy, these accommodation strategies must be location-specific in order to most effectively mitigate any effects of sea level rising in the surrounding community. Retreat strategies involve the relocation of development from areas of high risk to areas of lower risk and the potential prevention of future development in these high-risk areas. These are usually going to be last resort options as it is the most costly and most disruptive of mitigation strategies. Now moving on to the state level. Each state, similarly to the local levels, has different ways to mitigate the effects of climate change related to sea level rising. In most states, they seem to understand the strength of the bottom-up approach and have policies either regulating or bolstering the strategies already put in place by the local jurisdictions. In California, they formed a select committee on sea level rise and the California economy in order to figure out how to most effectively combat the sea level rise in their state. They began with a few policy recommendations, including the educating the public about the sea level rise and ensuring the state was proactive in planning for sea level rise. But the most useful, in my opinion, state-level action they took was to gather all of the state agencies together and hear reports on what they experienced and how they believed each sector could best combat this emergency. The state agencies included were the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission, the Natural Resources Agency, the California Coastal Commission, the California State Lands Commission, and the California State Coastal Conservancy, who all sent representatives to ensure their voices and ideas were heard in order to most effectively and efficiently mitigate against the sea level rise. Now moving on to the federal level. The federal level continues the bottom-up role by acting in a supplementary role to both the local and state levels of emergency management. FEMA has recognized the reality that climate change is causing the sea levels to rise and is committed to mitigating the damages it may cause. While the state and local level may be more focused on protecting against the effects of sea level rise, at the federal level, they can focus on attempting to prevent sea level rise from happening at all. There are three major facets to the emergency of rising sea levels that the federal government has either specific authority and responsibility over or is simply the best equipped to deal with in terms of mitigation strategies, these being infrastructure, global leadership, and the federal budget. Infrastructure. While local and state governments can spend money on infrastructure, the massive projects required to mitigate the effects of sea level rising must be spearheaded by the federal government. Most local and state governments not only do not have the capital required to fund these large projects, but these long-term costly projects may not be seen as a priority to these communities when they must keep a balanced budget from year to year. Therefore, these need to be initiated by the federal government. Global leadership. Due to the United States' presence on the international stage as a global superpower, our federal government must be using its power to lead the other countries to join in the fight against the rising sea levels in order to mitigate the damage done within our own borders. The federal government has access to these other global leaders that the state and local levels do not have, and must therefore take responsibility for this mitigation strategy. The federal budget. This may seem obvious to bring up, but the federal government has control over the federal budget. The federal government also, unlike many state and local governments, is allowed to use deficit spending to finance large projects like those needed to mitigate against the long-term effects of sea level rising. It is important not only to focus on what the federal government should be spending money on, but also what it should not be spending its money on. More than half of the U.S.'s discretionary spending goes to our military. The United States military is a bigger polluter than 140 countries, meaning that if we want to mitigate against sea level rise, we should heavily consider shrinking the size of one of the biggest polluters in the world, our own military. The United States must also stop subsidies it is providing to fossil fuel companies in order to keep them profitable and in business so that they can transition the country to a new age of renewable energy.